Hey, it's Andy Yanez, and welcome to another episode of the Houston Roundball Review presents Folks Talking Sports, presented by Five Star Properties. Five Star Properties, a Dallas-based company owned by a UH alum. If you are facing foreclosure or need to sell your house as is for cash, call 972-532 SELL. That's 972-532-SELL, or visit their website at fivestarprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. And without further ado, welcome into the show, James Mueller of the Daily Cougar, Willy Gibson. How are you two doing?
Doing
Good,
well.
sir. How about you?
I'm doing good. We'll have a lot to discuss in regards to the University of Houston Cougars men's basketball team going out on the road in Charlottesville and beating Virginia, an epic World Cup finale, and a lot more, including Ohio State men's basketball hoops, because they had a big game over the weekend as well. Don't go anywhere. This is Folks Talking Sports, presented by Five Star Property. The new intro for Folks Talking Sports is pretty dope. A big shout out to Chris for having one of his friends being able to hook that up for us. But without further ado, I guess we'll start in regards to the Houston Cougars men's basketball team. James, I'm going to toss it over to you first. I'd love to get your thoughts about what the Cougars were able to do on the road, which honestly was, you can't even really say it was arguable. It was the best, uh, at least up to this point, win of the season. They went up to Charlottesville and dethroned number two Virginia in a game that, outside of the first 4 or 5 minutes, it really seemed like Houston was able to impose its will against the Cavaliers.
Yeah, for sure. It was sort of similar to the Alabama game and where, Houston fell down early. They weathered the storm a little bit. And then in that second half, they got out to a big lead. And this time they were able to close it out. Jarris Walker played probably arguably his best game of the year. He it wasn't his top scoring game, but he did a little bit of everything, rebounded well, dished out, I think, 4 assists. And I mean, from all I've heard, I wasn't there, but it was a pretty crazy environment. So to be able to do that as a freshman is very impressive. And then, yeah, it's just they talked about this game being a confidence boost for, or just a confidence boost after last week, and or a chance to redeem themselves, and they certainly did that with going down and dethroning number two.
For sure, that's something that Kelvin Sampson post game said. He said he's not sure if Houston would have been able to go into Charlottesville and pull off that victory the way they were able to do if it hadn't been for that experience that they got a week ago against Alabama. And especially, they looked much more comfortable. Something that Kelvin Sampson said, told reporters that were there live in Charlottesville, is that just overall the team was able to go in there and execute the game plan well. And defensively, they were able to hold down Virginia to really a good performance overall across team defense. They said that they did a good job. The game plan coming into the game was trying to take away the middle. So they encouraged Virginia's guards to drive baseline, but what they were trying to do is take away any of the big men that would roll down the middle of the lane. That's something that Virginia would do really well, or that's how they've hurt their opponents this season and forced them to kick it out to the corner. And that's how Houston would defend them. And Calvin Sampson was pleased overall with that. And then, absolutely, like you mentioned, James, in regards to Jarris Walker, he did a little bit about a little bit of everything for the Cougars with 17 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and he really hit the dagger on Virginia towards the end of that second half, where he had a nice play. He drove down to his right, faked like he was going to turn back to his left, and then just rose up for a jumper that, I mean, that was a difficult shot over Jaden Gardner, who obviously the Cougars know really well. And looking ahead, they have one more game left in their non-conference slate before they start their final American Athletic Conference schedule beginning December 28th against Tulsa, and that'll be this upcoming Wednesday against McNeese. Quick thoughts on that game, James, in regards to McNeese, because obviously the meat and bones of the non-conference schedule is behind them, but still an important game in regards to being able to close out the non-conference slate with just one loss. That would be pretty impressive with the opponents that they faced early on.
Yeah, for sure. The big thing I'm looking for going into this McNeese game is just the rotations Kelvin Sampson uses, because he's talked about experimenting with a few different things. And interestingly, against Virginia, only guard to play off the bench was true, or I don't know if he's a true freshman. He was with the team for one
You
semester,
redshirt, so
but
yeah, technically he's a redshirt.
redshirt freshman Emmanuel Sharp, Ramon Walker didn't play. True freshman Terrence Arsenault didn't get in there, and then the only two other people off the bench were Reggie Chaney, who even though his stats won't pop off the page, his second half was really impressive and something that sort of sparked the Cougars, and also JVA Francis, but he only played 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm interested to see. Kelvin's talked about it a lot, still trying to learn this team and sort of what fits, what groups fit. And so, going into conference play, that's going to be big. So this is your final chance to tune up before you head in there. So I'm interested to see the different rotations he rolls out there and sort of if he's starting to find groups of five that he likes outside of, just the typical starters.
I think it's interesting too against Virginia. He said that's a team that's really hard for freshmen to go in there and play just because of how disciplined they are, and they really force you to play as disciplined against them as well in regards to being able to take care of the ball. That's one of the biggest keys that Houston and Kelvin Sampson said was going into the game. And like you mentioned, for back-to-back games, JVA Francis, he was the first big man off the bench for Houston. Emmanuel Sharp was the first guard, and against Virginia on Saturday, it was just an 8-man rotation. So at least up to this point, no, certainly you would assume that those are the 8 that Kelvin Sampson has the most confidence in, at least to this point in the season. And there's still a lot left to go as they really begin the conference slate just 10 days from today. But on that note, we'll transition over. We're sticking to college hoops. Willie, we're going to toss it over to you because there was another big game. Saturday was a really good slate for college basketball across the entire country. And one of those games was between number 23 Ohio State and the North Carolina Tar Heels that went into overtime. And it saw North Carolina coming away with the victory. What were your takeaways from that game? What stood out to you about that game, Will?
What stood out to me as far as from the Ohio State perspective is true freshman Bryce Sensabaugh. Had a career high 22 points, 8 rebounds, and he kind of had a coming into his own game. He's had games where you've seen he scratched the surface. He's coming. I think yesterday he arrived in a certain aspect that on the big stage, Madison Square Garden, the mecca of basketball, he came in. Even though Ohio State did not get the win, he took control of that game. And also along with him, true point guard, a true freshman as well, point guard Bruce Thornton had 17 points, who's been phenomenal from day one. A true freshman starting that point guard at Ohio State is rare, and he's come in and pretty much taken this team and made it his own. So, I mean, Chris Holtmann, he saw enough. Although they didn't get the win, this team is still young, and he saw enough to build upon going into the Big Ten schedule. They do have one last game prior to Christmas break. Wednesday, they do play the Maine Black Bears here at the Schottenstein Center prior to, I believe they get 5 days for Christmas off. So, we'll, hopefully get back. Should get back on the winning track against the Maine Black Bears on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't afford to lose a bye game when it comes to Maine, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on just overall the makeup of the team. Maybe for people that haven't seen Ohio State play, what's kind of been the strengths for them? What's kind of been the weaknesses early on during their non-conference schedule?
The strength is definitely the backcourt. I mean, they have, as I said, true freshman Bruce Thornton. They run the the 3 forward lineup. So size is not what is typical for Ohio State. Zed Key will be classified. He's listed as a forward, but he, for playing purposes, is the center at 6'8". He's more of a 3-4 combo forward. So he's, the disadvantage for Ohio State is in the size department. But Chris Holtmann, he's doing what he does. He's making it work. A guard dominant lineup, as I said, Bruce Thornton, the true freshman, Tanner Holden, transfer from Wright State out of the portal, and also Sean McNeil from West Virginia off the bench as well. Also, Isaac Lickliker, he from Oklahoma State, he's been away from the team, but he also has played major minutes. Again, the transfer from Oklahoma State. So The guard play is what stirs the drink here at Ohio State. But the size that they do have, it's serviceable. And going into the Big Ten season, we'll see how far this team can go at the hands on the shoulders of its freshman point guard.
And kind of looking at the Big Ten conference overall, who's kind of the team to watch in that conference as conference play begins within the week?
Number one, Purdue. Purdue's number one in the nation right now. They won yesterday over Davidson, so they're hands down the preseason favorite. Also, Illinois with the team that they have. Matthew Mayer from Baylor. And it's like every team has somebody key contributing from the transfer portal. And Illinois has just that. And Indiana as well. Mike Woodson and with his team, and he's in year 3. So he's pretty much putting his stamp on that team. So those 3 teams, along with Ohio State, are teams to look out for this season for the Big Ten.
For sure. And who will Ohio State open their conference slate again?
New Year's Eve against Northwestern.
Interesting. So they have about 12 days until that portion, really the meat and bones of the conference schedule starts rolling. So before we transition over, because I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on kind of the big headline event that was early on in the morning, but I do like to remind everybody watching that this is Folks Talking Sports presented by 5 Star Properties. If you're facing foreclosure and want to sell fast, visit 5starprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. They're a Dallas-based company owned by a UH alum, and they are the primary sponsor for Folks Talking Sports for the duration of the college basketball season. So we had starting off the show with the college basketball segment, but transitioning over now to really where all eyes, not just in America, but across the world, were early on this morning. It was between Argentina and France in the World Cup final that saw Argentina come away with the victory and penalties after a 3-3 tie when all was said and done. And when it came to all the time, they went into the penalties, and it was Argentina that was able to pull away. And really, it was a game that flipped on its head towards the 80th minute mark with really just a credit to what Mbappe was able to do for France. But just overall, James, I'll go to you. What were your initial thoughts of that game and any main takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, going in, I thought Argentina would win. I did not think it would be as dominant of a showing that we saw, like you mentioned, because for the first 75 or so minutes, it was all Argentina. They scored twice in the first half. We're holding the fort down in the second half, just trying to get to the finish line. And then Mbappe took over and, 2 goals in 90 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe. Just insane. And then the resiliency of France to bounce back once again. Messi scores in the second extra period, and France once again finds another way to get a penalty. Mbappe puts it in the back of the net. Overall, just it's all you wish for in a championship game. It's exciting. Had a little bit of everything, and in the end, I know a lot of people were pretty happy to see Messi, finally get that elusive World Cup title. Overall, I didn't really have a dog in the fight, but I was just rooting for a good match, and it lived up to the expectation after what looked like it was going to be, just an absolute blowout.
Yeah, domination. Will, I'm curious to get your thoughts from the World Cup.
Yeah, definitely. As James said, a dominant performance by Argentina. Just curious to see what would have happened if France had been at full strength. I know they had a lot of injuries going into today's final. So had they been at full strength, I think it would have been a lot more interesting. And maybe, perhaps, I don't know, maybe they pull it out. But hands down, you got to give credit to Messi and Argentina, and they did what they had to do. They won it, so congrats to them. And I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to see the clip of the Argentine broadcaster that was broadcast.
Yeah, I saw it live. I heard it live.
Oh, you saw? Yeah, you heard it live. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, that was deep. That was deep to hear him and his emotion and how he, I would just spilled out.
Yeah. And I think that's the really cool thing about, an event just like the World Cup, where it's so many eyeballs, and then you get the stories like that, where that emotion, especially from that broadcast as it was happening live, it kind of just adds an extra layer to just that moment. That even if you're not necessarily a big fan of the sport, if you're listening it to live, you can kind of take that moment to kind of step away and be like, dang, this is a really really big deal. It's history they're watching unfold, and I'm curious to get this question out there, because a game like that, especially from kind of localizing a little bit, if you can localize an event such as the World Cup, but obviously from a United States perspective, soccer isn't, soccer here in America, everyone else across the world, for football que le llaman, they're going to be, is that a game that you get in this World Cup final that maybe you can get a lot of the younger youth really in America to see a game like that and say, hey, crap, that's something I can see myself envisioning. That's something that maybe I want to grow up and be in a stage like that. Do you think that's something that could potentially get some more attention to soccer from an American perspective?
From a niche standpoint, absolutely, but um, across the board, no, I don't think so. I think it's more so. I mean, because it's what's prominent as far as media coverage. Soccer doesn't get the coverage here.
Yeah.
NFL does, NBA does, MLB does. So that's what kids tend to gravitate towards. Soccer is a niche. We talk about the World Cup, but in 3 weeks, are we going to be talking about soccer? No, we're going to be talking about NBA trade deadline, the Super Bowl, and NFL playoffs, MLB, spring training. So I don't think so.
James, what about you?
Yeah, I sort of side with Will on that. I think certainly you see it across the U.S. People get excited for the World Cup and because it's a big deal, but in the long run, it's just not what's out there, and the U.S. Soccer League with the MLS it just doesn't hit the same with the local population here, and so I feel like I do think the U.S. has taken positive steps over the past decade or so, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and it's going to take more than just an exciting World Cup like we had this year. There's got to be ways to get kids exposed to it more than just once every 4 years.
Hmm. And I think the biggest thing too, when it comes to the national men's soccer team, at least from a men's perspective, because we know that the women's in the United States national perspective, they've been able to find a lot of success on the World Cup landscape. But from a men's perspective, they're also missing a star caliber player, and that has that power when it comes to Mbappe and Messi. And I think it's an interesting point that you guys bring up in regards to the English to the Fox coverage. They've moved the celebration of the World Cup to FS1 just because the NFL was going to sit front and center stage. I think that certainly encapsulates what the priorities are in America, and that's a great point. That is a disadvantage that a lot of people here in the United States have because, like you said, Will, NFL is king, and then even when it comes to other, I mean, media across ESPN, I'm sure SportsCenter is gonna have a segment on it, but then the main focus will be on the games across the NFL, the games across the NBA. So I agree with both of you guys. It's certainly a perspective, and it'll be interesting to see where 4 years from now the World Cup will be in North America, and it'll be interesting to see just how much buzz that generates with their games across the United States, and really, hopefully, it can be as exciting games as we saw in this World Cup final because just from a Houston's perspective, they're going to be one of the host cities for that World Cup. So it's going to be exciting to see that event take stage in the United States. But once again, we
Question for you.
are.
Oh,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
who's the most prominent U.S. soccer player?
Pulisic,
That's
probably.
Christian Pulisic, right?
Mm-hmm.
correct.
Who's he play for?
Chelsea.
Exactly. Exactly. The most prominent U.S. soccer player plays for an English club. So I think that answers our question.
And that's not something that's going to change because
Yeah.
you're not going to see them come over to MLS anytime, certainly not in their prime.
Yeah. I mean, we have a soccer team. We have an MLS team here in Columbus, the Columbus Crew, and they do pretty well. But they're not holding a candlestick to Ohio State. Football, basketball, anything. It's just for whatever reason. Well, it's a niche sport, and that's not to belittle it at all. I think it's just, as I said, the media coverage goes towards the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, and you just don't have that coverage. That coverage, which then draws the interest, which then draws the numbers. You just don't have it.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And on that note, do want to remind everybody that they are watching and or listening to Folks Talking Sports presented by Five Star Properties. If your house needs too many repairs and you want to sell as is, be sure to visit 5starprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. They're a data space company owned by a UH alum, and they are the primary sponsor for Folks Talking Sports throughout the college basketball season. And in regards to college sports now, well, there's going to be two different, very, very different mindsets, because Ohio State, they are preparing to play in what? Well, a thing
The Peach Bowl,
called
the college football playoff.
correct. Meanwhile, James, the Cougars, they're preparing to play in what?
They get to go to Shreveport, Louisiana, and play in the Independence Bowl.
The Independence Bowl. Very, very different games, very different goals, and very, very different stages for both of these programs. But well, I'm gonna go to you first. Just as we approach into that matchup between Ohio State, what have kind of been the I guess leading up, what are the storylines leading up for the Buckeyes as really they kind of come into underdog, something that they're not necessarily familiar with, at least from this perspective, and really they were able to slide in because of USC's loss in the Pac-12 championship game.
The focus on the field for the bowl is more so to get the nasty taste out of our mouth and get the nasty taste out of their mouth from their last game. Didn't end the way they thought it would. It did not end the way they wanted it to. So now there's a chance at redemption. And possibly, if things go well, see that team again on January 9th. So now the focus is let's sharpen, tie up what we have to tie up. Let's correct what we have to correct. And let's go in there, not overlooking Georgia. Let's go in there to beat Georgia while not looking ahead, but keeping in the back of the mind that there's a chance you can see that team again on January 9th.
How do you think Ohio State matches up with Georgia, a team that really, especially the last 2 years, they've kind of stepped in the role that you've thought of Alabama in years in the past, certainly from an SEC perspective?
I think they match up well. I mean, of course, that dominant defense that Georgia has. I mean, I'm not going to take anything away from them. However, what I will say is that Ohio State has, I believe, an offense that they haven't seen. I don't think they've seen receivers the like of Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Mbuka, even Julian Fleming. I don't think they've seen a quarterback as C.J. Stroud. I don't think, so when you look at that, and that's not me with my scarlet and gray glasses on. I just look at what Marvin Harrison has done this year. I don't see a receiver in the SEC, let alone the country, that did what he did. And now he gets a chance to showcase that New Year's Eve in Atlanta.
James, in terms of the Houston Cougars football perspective, we know kind of the headliner was that Tank Dell, the star receiver for the Cougars, was decided that he is gonna play in the bowl game, despite that he's gonna pursue his NFL endeavors after this bowl game. And it was something that really you were there. Tank Dell gave you the answer. What was his reasoning in playing in the bowl game? But let's just focus on that first. What really were you surprised that Tank Dell was going to play in the bowl game? And then after listening to his reasoning, what's kind of the thing that sticks out in terms of what Tank Dell was able to say?
Yeah, before I answer that, I just want to go on record and say I think Ohio State will beat Georgia. I picked them to pull off the upset. So there's that. We'll see. But in terms of Tank Dell, I was surprised that he played. Typically, unless it's a New Year's Six or playoff game and you're going and you're going to the NFL, the kids are just going to sit out. Sorry, my family's screaming. I don't know what's happening, but it's just the typical response. It's the norm. You sit out if it's not a big time bowl game, if you don't have a chance to, if you're not playing on New Year's, basically. And so I was a little surprised with that, just because you never know what can happen. You don't want to risk an injury. I think his reasoning was basically, I want to finish out what I started here at UH. We let people down this year. We didn't get anywhere close to our expectations. You can't make up or right all your wrongs in one game. A win over Louisiana is not going to do that, but you can at least, give the program a little momentum going into the Big 12. And with quarterback Clayton Tune playing in the game as well, him and Tune and Dell are, really tight. They've been together. They've done a lot of great things together. I think, he just wanted to be out there with him one more time as well. So I was surprised, but I do understand like the reasonings he gave to why he will be suiting up one last time.
Mm-hmm. What I want to ask about, or to you, and something that stood out to me is when he potentially said that kind of one of the factors that led into him going, or at least pursuing getting drafted in the NFL, was because Clayton Tune's not coming back next season. I think that was interesting. That stood out to me when I heard that. He said potentially he would have come back. At least he would have maybe pondered it more had Tune been the guy returning, and that's kind of one of the things where he said, he didn't want to have to build essentially another relationship with a new quarterback. And also he said he never thought about transferring anywhere else.
Yeah, for sure. I do, you have to take what people say with a grain of salt, but I do think if Tune was eligible to come back, he really probably would have considered it pretty heavily, just because you look at the draft board. I think a lot of people have him as like wide receiver 15 or so. So it's not like, he's not going to go in the first round. He probably won't go in the first 3 or 4 rounds, earliest, maybe late 4th, early 5th, maybe even later than that. So, you think he has a chance to improve his draft stock, but, with Houston, I understand not returning to Houston. No one knows who the quarterback's going to be next year. Obviously, Lucas Coley is probably the front runner right now, but they're going to try to bring in transfers, and just working with a new quarterback, who knows how that's going to work. I was surprised though about the transfer answer. I thought that would be something he would seriously consider. You put up some of the best numbers in the country out of any receiver, and I'm sure there's some bigger programs that would be willing to take you, and go out and even on a bigger stage and show what you can do. So I was surprised that he said he didn't even put any thought into that.
Well, I'm gonna toss it over to you. I'm curious what stood out to you when James was giving his answer.
I'll say this. I never question a young man. I don't know a young man's situation. I don't. I'm never critical of anyone's the reasons for leaving early. I get it. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know his family situation. I don't know his financial situation. But it's shocking to hear that he's projected as wide receiver 15, 5th round pick, and has eligibility remaining, but yet he wants to move on, especially in this age of NIL. If it's a financial situation, again, I don't know. But to hear a young man saying, I'm going to leave school early and I'm projected, because I was already thinking in my mind, I was going to ask you guys if he had gotten feedback from the committee as to where his draft stock was. And to hear that it's a 5th round pick at best, especially in this age of NIL, that's interesting to me. That's interesting to me. That I understand that his quarterback's not coming back. Can I get it? And I don't. Is he a senior? Is Clayton Tune a senior?
Yeah, Clayton
Okay.
Senior kids.
So no more eligibility. Okay.
Correct.
But then to say, okay, I don't know, swing for the fences. Go to the portal and see if USC will come get you. Catch passes from the Heisman Trophy winner. If you're a 5th round pick now, why not go catch passes from the Heisman Trophy winner? I don't know. That's again, not being critical, not criticizing the young man. I don't know his situation. But that's kind of interesting to hear that he's wide receiver 15, fifth round pick, and he's looking to leave.
That's certainly it's going to be interesting to see, and I mean, honestly, that could be another reason that he had in terms of playing in the bowl game as they try to improve, or as he tries to improve that stock. But when you're looking at Tankathon, which is obviously it's just one site, but you look at the receivers that they have projected. Yet, James, you're absolutely right. Tank Dell's not projected in their top 10, I believe. And it's interesting that Rashee Rice, who's a fellow receiver from the American Athletic Conference from SMU, he is in that list of potential 2023 receivers on the board. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, I think it's something that Tank could improve his draft stock as you know, as the draft gets closer with the different events. Like, James, is he gonna be in the Shrine Bowl, or is he gonna be in he's gonna be in one of those other games, correct?
He's playing. I don't know how it works, but he's playing in the Senior Bowl. Even though he's not a senior. I don't know if he's doing anything else. But he's doing that. I know for sure. And then I assume if he gets an invite to the combine, he'll do that and stuff. But yeah.
And for going back to that bowl game, like you said, the Independence Bowl, it'll be between 7-5 Houston and 6-6 Louisiana. And since that game is on Friday, December 23, James, I know you gotta head out. I'm curious to get your predictions. What are your early predictions you have for that game, and what do you expect will happen?
Yeah, I think the Houston offense will score a lot of points. Just, last time Clayton Tune's taken the field, they want to, Dana's talked about how this is a game that or a win they owe fans. So I think there'll be some motivation there, and especially considering they don't really have many opt-outs for this bowl game, that, they'll be prepared. I do think there'll be some defensive struggles at times, but I think Houston wins by 10-14 when it's all said and done.
Which would be, I would consider that a success for that bowl game specifically, not for the season. But I think it's interesting, certainly with the way the regular season ended with that loss to Tulsa. That's going to be something they're trying to, like you said, James, get that bad taste out of their mouth. Before you head out, James, where can people find you? As always, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Y'all can find me on Twitter at JDM2186, and then all my UH coverage is at dailycougar.com.
James, as always, thank you for being on the show. Best of luck. You're not going to the bowl game, correct?
I will not be there. No.
Cool. Then I'll see you on Wednesday then when Houston takes on McNeese. The men's basketball team takes on McNeese. Again, thank you for being on the show, and we'll catch you at I'll see you on Wednesday, but we'll see you at the next Folks Talking Sports.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, John.
For sure. And Will, before we move on, I'd like to remind everybody that this is Folks Talking Sports, presented by 5-Star Properties. If your house has fire damage, water damage, or even toxic mold and you'd like to sell as is, be sure to visit 5starprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. They are a Dallas-based company owned by a UH alum, and 5-Star Properties is the primary sponsor for Folks Talking Sports for the duration of the college basketball season. So huge shout out to 5-Star Properties. That was actually the first ever primary sponsor of Let's Rage Coogs way back when in September. So obviously we have that relationship with 5-Star Properties, and they'll always be a friend not only here at the Houston Round Ball Review, but of Let's Rage Coogs as well. To the NFL, well, because the Cleveland Browns were able to, could you call it an upset over the Baltimore Ravens, in injured Lamar Jackson at home? But I'm curious to get, one, your thoughts on the game, and two, also on Deshaun Watson's kind of progression since coming back from his suspension.
I'll take the second one first. His progression, as expected. I think people had unrealistic expectations, for one. For him coming back, he hadn't played in over 2 years, 700 days, well documented. And to think, I had people saying after the Cincinnati game that he needed to be benched, that Jacoby Brissett needed to be playing again because Cleveland's in win now mode. And I said, wait a minute. They were 4-7 when he came back. I said, this is week 2 for him. This is week 14 for everyone else. I said, so if you're expecting him to be benched after 2 weeks, what is the expectation of everyone else that's been playing for 14 weeks? Um, I think yesterday clearly was his best game, and I think that's being said. Next week against New Orleans will be his best game because the more and more he, as Kevin Stefanski says, Coach Kevin Stefanski of the Cleveland Browns, the more and more he stacks game reps, he's going to continue to get better, and that's just natural. The more you do something, you're going to get better in most instances, I'll say. And thoughts on the game? The defense showed up. Yes, Jim Lamar Jackson was out. This team played Tyler Huntley last year. Lamar Jackson got hurt in Cleveland last year for the Ravens, and Tyler Huntley came in. Actually, Cleveland was winning 24-3. Tyler Huntley came in, brought them back, almost won the game. Cleveland ended up holding on to win 24-22. So they had seen Tyler Huntley before. But the defense the last 4 weeks has started with the Tampa Bay game. The defense has turned a corner. The switch has been clicked, flipped, and they're starting to play better. They held Baltimore to 3 points. Justin Tucker uncharacteristically missed 2 field goals. One was blocked. The other one he just flat shanked, which, welcome to December in Cleveland, because that wind, and for that case, Cade York, the Cleveland kicker, missed 2 field goals as well. That wind is nothing nice in December, swirling around the closed end of the dog pound in Cleveland. So, great win for the Browns. I don't know if I'll call it an upset, but it's a win and they need it. I mean, this team isn't about going to the playoffs this year. This is about maximizing the reps that you have with Deshaun this year to catapult him positively into 2023.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of staying on the topic, a couple things. I think interesting that you make that point in regards to the Browns, maybe not necessarily having the playoffs in mind for this season, and like you said, being about getting Deshaun and then getting him some positive momentum into next season, which obviously they feel that Deshaun Watson was that missing piece from the quarterback perspective that could help carry him over the hump and be able to win a Super Bowl down the road. But in regards to the draft pick perspective, does anyone in Cleveland really care that the Texans own their first round pick, or what's kind of the mindset in that aspect?
Now that it's like 14, 15, 16, no. But when it was like 5, 6, yeah, they did. They did, but the team was like I said, 3-7, 4-7. Oh, the draft pick was absolutely top of the conversation. But now, well, I'll say this. In Cleveland, draft picks are always topics of conversation because people always want to hold on to draft picks. They don't want to trade draft picks because that could be the one that's going to put us over the hump. But now, I think when they've seen Deshaun and what he's capable of, again, he's 3 weeks in. What can he do without an 11-week gap between training camp and his first game? So that's what these next remaining 4 games are about, or 3 games now. Remaining 3 games are about is getting him comfortable, positive reps to get him ready for 2023.
Mm-hmm. And what the other question I was going to ask in regards to Watson from the off the field perspective, has that noise kind of died down a bit, at least in regards to the Cleveland area? What's kind of that been like from a local perspective?
It has. It has. He won his first game at home yesterday. I mean, that's pretty much the topic of conversation. And we expected that to happen once he got on the field. Last week was the first time he actually had media availability, and it was all football questions. Prior to him, his first media availability prior to the Houston game, it was VP of Media Relations, Peter John Baptiste, specified and specifically stated football-only questions. And then you had media that typically aren't in those Thursday media availabilities ask the first 2 questions that were non-media or non-football related. And it was kind of a gotcha moment, if you
Mm.
will, attempt at a gotcha moment that was quickly squashed, and he wasn't. Uh, I don't want to say permitted. He chose not to answer them, and understandably so. But now this was the week going into Baltimore where it was strictly a football centric media session, all football questions. No one even brought up, or I don't know, I can't say no one thought it, but no one ever brought up the off the field situations, and and you can tell the relief and the comfort level that Deshaun had in speaking, and even yesterday post game. You can see it, and even in the loss last week against Cincinnati, you can see his leadership on the field. He was rallying guys, keeping guys engaged, letting them know, hey, we're not out of this. Let's go. Keep your head in the game. Those type things. And Jacoby was doing that as well. But those type things haven't been seen in Cleveland from the quarterback position in quite some time.
So the team overall around him, they've kind of embraced him as that leader.
They have. They have. Absolutely. To a man, they've talked about his leadership from day one, from the trade, during OTAs, during mini camp, during training camp. And then during his time of reacclimation, if you will, that he was able to be back in the building in meetings only. Then he was ramped up to practice, and then he played. They've talked about his leadership seemingly since he's been since the trade was announced.
Interesting. You're good to give the Cleveland Browns really perspective, especially kind of the noise, at least from the Houston perspective, when out of all the games that Deshaun Watson came back was against the Texans now 3 weeks ago. There was a lot of noise just in regards, obviously that off the field perspective, but even then as well, just being able to see him on the field in a place that he had played for his entire NFL career at NRG Stadium, and now that he's kind of separated from that, certainly from a Browns perspective, that's huge that the players around them have embraced him as that leader going forward. And as they close out the season, like you said, the key for the Browns would be to see him continue to improve heading into next season. But once again, for those of you guys watching live on the Houston Roundball Review YouTube channel or audio only, wherever you get folks talking sports for those platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, any other platforms that you may be listening to, this is Folks Talking Sports presented by 5 Star Properties. If you inherited a property and don't want to be a landlord, visit 5starprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. They are a Dallas-based company owned by a UH alum. They are the primary sponsor for Folks Talking Sports for the remainder of the college basketball season. Again, that's 5 Star Properties. Kind of changing gears to the other major sport, at least in America right now, the National Basketball Association, and sticking with Cleveland, the Cleveland Cavaliers currently they sit at third in the Eastern Conference. They're 20-11. They just came off a pretty impressive win against the Dallas Mavericks that came down to overtime. What have you seen from the Cavaliers overall to start the season? It's still December, so they've what, 2 months now into the basketball season that they've had in the NBA, and they sit atop the third top three in the Eastern Conference.
Before I answer that, can I just tie a bow around that Deshaun Watson piece? I
Yeah,
was
go
able
ahead.
to take a peek at the 2023 schedule, and just for localization, the Cleveland Browns do visit the Houston Texans again in NRG Stadium in 2023. So get your
Oh,
popcorn ready.
interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. It'll be, well, depending to see what the Texans do. That don't even get me on this. So they're now 112-1. They have been more competitive since against the Browns. I guess something about those top matchups against the Cowboys and against the Chiefs has brought out the best in the Texans, at least from that perspective, from a competitive standpoint. But they haven't been able to close the deal today. Tough way to lose. They forced overtime against the Chiefs. They actually got a stop on the Chiefs on their first offensive possession in overtime. I think they did they're pretty good. This is probably the best that they've played against Patrick Mahomes in the past since he's been the quarterback for the Chiefs, which is saying a lot compared to where, at least when they were supposed to be competitive, going back to when Watson was here. This is certainly the best over from a defensive perspective. They were able to contain Mahomes, but killer fumble by quarterback Davis Mills at their very first possession. I think it was interesting. It was really funny that the TV broadcast kind of jinxed her and said, "Oh, the Texans haven't turned it over all afternoon." And lo and behold, the next play was a strip sack by Mills that set up basically the walk-off touchdown for the Chiefs in that aspect. So I think for all intents and purposes, the Texans are pretty much, barring something drastic, they've put themselves in really good position to own the number one overall pick. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the Browns will be back in Houston. And from a fan perspective, they're probably hoping there's a lot more buzz around that matchup than it was this year, because by the time the Browns got into town, the Texan season was, for all intents and purposes, over. So hopefully that matchup is closer to the beginning of the season when there's much more hope. But transitioning over to the NBA, and in regards to the Cavaliers and the success that they've had early on in the season, I think from a local perspective, that's something that the Rockets probably aspire to be to at least in the future, 2 seasons from now, what the Cavaliers were able to do, especially post LeBron, whenever he left the second time to head to the Lakers.
Right. To that point, I was at a conversation with someone today, 4 years ago when I first started covering the Cavs regularly. There were nights where entire sections of the arena, you may see 2 people
Wow.
in the entire section. And then slowly but surely, kudos to Kobe Altman, Mike Gansey, his staff, at the time, Andre Patterson, Brandon Weems, that entire front office staff. They've methodically, slowly but surely, put the pieces out. Colin Sexton, Darius Garland, Isaac Coro, Evan Mobley, and then you Ochai Abaje, and then you take those pieces and trade them for one Donovan Mitchell, and that's the key. You asked earlier what's been the key. He's the key. Donovan Mitchell. There was a time Friday night. Benedict Mathurin, rookie for Indiana. The Cavs were playing Indiana, and Indiana was up, I think, 13 at the time of the fourth quarter, which they never should have been at that time. This Cavs team, they were sleepwalking, and it was a tie-up. Donovan Mitchell and Benedict Mathurin, and the refs blew the whistle, and no one let go of the ball. Mathurin, Mitchell, Mathurin, Mitchell. They're holding on to the ball, and Donovan Mitchell just kind of looked at him like. And then finally, Mathurin let the ball go. Donovan Mitchell took the ball and threw it to the ref. Now, on paper, you're kind of like, what? It's a tie-up. What does it matter? But post-game, he was asked about that, and Donovan Mitchell said, sometimes you have to, not to sound corny, you got to let them know. And from that point on, Cleveland went on a 28-9 run to end the game. They won the game from that point on. Now, to look at it like, man, does that really matter? Did that really matter? Yes. Because this team would have never done that last year at all. It's Donovan Mitchell. He brings something to this team that they lacked sorely. Leadership. Darius Garland can take all the shots, but now he doesn't have to. Now he can distribute. Now, and even Donovan Mitchell has said, this team has brought something out of him because Lamar Stevens has, most people would consider Lamar a role player. He's a very integral part of this team. Starter at small forward, comes off the bench, does whatever needs to be done. But Donovan just credited him because he checks Donovan. And he said, no one's ever done that in my career for me in the 5 years prior to this one. I've never had the person that would come to me and say, come on, man, look, what are you doing? Come on, let's go. Quit playing. And Lamar Stevens does that. And that, in turn, has allowed Donovan to lead this team the way he's done it. Like you said, 2011 third in the East coming up on Christmas. So Uh, this team is definitely on its way. Definitely playoffs last year. They were fourth in the East prior to the injuries. That uh, Jared Allen had injuries. Darius Garland had injuries. Um, Colin Sexton missed virtually the entire season. But now, along with health, you have Donovan Mitchell. And I think he's going to be the one that's going to lead this team back. I won't say LeBron levels. It was interesting. He had 45 with the Lakers in town a couple weeks ago, Donovan Mitchell. So, he talked about how much of an honor it is to do that with LeBron in the house. So, you know, the best I think is yet to be seen from this team going forward, and I think it begins and ends with Donovan Mitchell.
I think that's such an underrated aspect when you look at teams that are looking to rebuild. It's not always about being able to draft young guys and having them grow together. It's like you said, it's making a move like that, being able to bring in a piece like Donovan Mitchell that even then it's not like you're not going to say that Donovan Mitchell's old, but he's at the point where he's had so much playoff experience. He's been there with the Jazz. He's had to be really the face for the Jazz, and now with the Cavs, I mean he's still relatively a young player that can not necessarily he's not where you could say he's too old for the roster or whatever. He's like you mentioned, that leadership he brings to the table, more importantly, the skill set that he brings to the table, and then he's still at a point where 3 years from now, 4 years from now, he could still be a key piece for the Cavaliers. And when you look at their younger guys, 3, 4 years down the road, to have a presence of Donovan Mitchell, that's something that's gonna just benefit them in the long run, and they are in a position to be a serious threat not only this season but for years to come. And that's something that's an underrated aspect from a rebuild that sometimes gets lost. That could be a key piece, especially with a team like the Rockets, that they're still in the phase where they're just trying to. They still have so many picks that they're still one trying to grow that young group, but they could put themselves in position a year from now, 2 years from now, to be able to make a move like that. That really came, out of left field, if you could say it. A lot of people thought that Donovan Mitchell would end up going to the Knicks, which the Knicks themselves, they've been hot as of late. But I think it's interesting from an NBA perspective. There's so many ways. There's not just one blueprint to follow in a team that could be rebuilding. And for the Cavs, especially the success that they've really haven't had when LeBron James is not on the roster.
Quick story about that. You're right. Everyone in the NBA world, sports world, thought Donovan was going home to the Knicks. Quick story. What happened was apparently the Knicks were playing around with some protections on their picks, and Kobe Altman, Cavs general manager at the time, now VP or president of basketball operations, was in New York, and he got wind of New York in their reluctancy to remove protections from picks. So he called Justin Zanuck, GM of the Utah Jazz, and said, "Hey, let's talk about Donovan. What will it take?" And they have a relationship. They've done some deals in the past. Jordan Clarkson from the Cavs to the Jazz for some picks. Uh, Rodney Hood at the time to the Cavs for some things, and they've done some quote unquote minor deals in the past. So they have a relationship. And Kobe Altman got on the phone, and 3 days later, Donovan Mitchell was a Cleveland Cavalier.
Uh-huh. Damn, that's crazy. So if Altman's never New York, that deal probably doesn't happen for the Cavs.
Yeah, 3 first-round picks, 3 players. Now, and
Jeez.
then talk to your earlier point about the picks. People are weirded out, like, we gave up too much. We gave up too much. I don't think people are saying they gave up too much now, because
Yeah,
Donovan Mitchell has come in again and just taken over in the right way.
crazy.
In the right way.
Right, but isn't that crazy how delicate, how really how quickly things can shift, and you kind of think about it where it's something that kind of it seems like out of the wind. It's just stuff. It's crazy you don't think about how delicate situations can be and how quickly things can pick up. And really, at some of the times, it should. I mean, I don't know if you could call that luck, but that's certainly a fortunate situation for the Cavs that one, Altman was able to find that out that the Knicks were hesitant with those picks, but then just like that relationship in place, it all fell. really fell in their lap really relatively quickly in a span of how quickly stuff goes behind closed doors. But that's pretty much going to do it for this episode of Folks Talking Sports presented by Five Star Properties. Once again, Five Star Properties is a Dallas-based company owned by a University of Houston alum. If you're facing foreclosure or you need to sell your house as is for cash, call 972-532-SELL or visit their website at fivestarprops.com. That's FIVESTARPROPS.com. And like I've mentioned throughout the show, a big shout out to Five Star Properties because not only are they the primary sponsor for Folks Talking Sports throughout the college basketball season, but really they were the first primary sponsor for Let's Rage Coogs. Once again, you can see their numbers there on the screen, 972-532-SELL, or if you want the numerical version, that's 972-532-7355, the Dallas-based company. But well, thank you for joining me. Where can people find you, and anything else you'd like to promote?
Thank you for having me, Andy. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Will Gibson 7, on Facebook at Will Knows. Thank you.
We'll be back. I'm not sure when our next Folks Talking Sports will be because next Sunday, obviously, it'll be Christmas Day. So we might have to call an audible on when exactly the show will be, but be posted to the social media sites. I'm sure Chris, who's currently in Dallas for, I think he said a quadruple header was going to be taking place in Dallas when it comes to college basketball. So he's living it up in the Dallas area. So kind of interesting. Five Star Properties. If you're around Chris, be sure to check them out as well if you're in town. But we'll be back next week at some point. Maybe not Sunday, maybe a little bit earlier, but just be sure to follow us on social media. You guys can do so. You can follow me on Twitter at AYANS_5. And we'll be back for Let's Rage Coogs on Wednesday night following the Houston Cougars men's basketball team's game over McNeese. Until then, once again, thank you guys for taking the time out of your guys' days, being able to enjoy an episode of Folks Talking Sports, and we'll see you guys next time.